So our last perspective in the personality chapter is the trait perspective. So when you look at something as potentially being a trait perspective item, you're going to look specifically at probably testing. So anything that we can quantify that helps us describe characteristics, that's going to be a trait theory. All right, so traits are going to be these characteristics that we have, and they remain pretty much the same throughout life. They may tweak just a little bit, but that you've got these traits within you, and they describe parts of your personality. So traits are those personality pieces. So if you tend to be the life of the party, that's a trait. If you tend to be very artistic, creative, that's a trait. So it's just those characteristics that we have. All right, so with the trait theories, what we're trying to do is we're focusing on your personality, and we're actually testing you in order to predict future behaviors or explain current ones. So we're focusing on the various components, the various traits of the trait perspective, the very characteristics. All right, so when we're looking at some people with the trait perspective, Gordon Allport went through the dictionary, and he's trying to find traits, words that could be considered traits. So things like, I don't know, happy and sad. And so they're all adjectives that would actually describe our traits, things that would make us up. And so when he looked at it, it was like thousands of words. I think it was over 4,000 words that he wrote down and said all of these could describe a trait, could describe a part of your personality. And so what he said was, because this was so consistent throughout life, that he actually believed that there was a potential that our neurons, our nervous system was actually wired, our DNA was actually predisposed us to become a specific way. So he was way before his time, because we found out that indeed there is a genetic link to certain traits. Shy people are naturally shy. They may come out of their shell. They may be able to, speak in front of people, but they will never be comfortable, because that's part of who they truly are. So I really love that story. I think that's so great. All right. So then Cattell came on the scene, and he came in with some categories, and he divided surface traits and source traits. So if we're looking at surface traits, what we mean is those traits that we can see. They're observable. So I'm seeing you act in a certain way, and I put a word to it. What I see is a surface trait. So if I see you acting shy, someone's trying to talk to you and you're kind of looking away, you're at a party and you kind of sit by yourself, you don't open up conversations, other people have to open it up for you. So I'm seeing you be shy. So that's going to be a surface traits. It's going to be all of those things that compose this belief of shyness. And then he's got these things called source traits. It's where that shyness comes from. Okay, so it's where the surface traits, where that shyness comes from. So if I'm looking at my source traits, I'm trying to figure out where shyness comes from, he has a word for that. It's introversion. And so you are an introvert if you tend to be shy. If you tend to be the life of the party, and that's what I'm seeing you be, that's going to be a surface trait. And what it comes from is extroversion. So source trait is going to be where it comes from. All right, so when we're looking at the trait perspective, Cattell wanted to be able to measure the strength of each one of the traits that he came up with. And so he has this 16 personality profile. And so if you look at the column that says factor, he's looking at the word warmth, and you're taking this test and it's giving you a certain score. If you score low on warmth, you tend to be a little bit more cold toward people, a little bit more selfish. If you score high, you tend to be more supportive and comforting. And so it's kind of this sliding scale. So you can be kind of right in the middle. And so maybe there are some times where you're cold and selfish, and sometimes where you're supportive and comforting. So it just depends. Do you score really low? Then you would be in that column. Really high, you would be in the other column. All right, looking at the sensitivity. If you score low on sensitivity, you're going to be that real gruff person. You tell it like it is. You're not worried about people's feelings. Okay. And then if you score high on sensitivity, you tend to be very, very, and that emotional, that touchy-feely, that sweet kind of behavior. All right. So this is the trait perspective of the 16 personality. Okay. So there's our 16 personalities and then our 2 various scores. All right, then comes on the scene McCrae and Costa, and they narrowed it down even more. So remember, we started off with 200, and then we went down to 16, and now we're down to 5, and this is McCrae and Costa. And so we spell it out ocean, and that each letter stands for a specific thing. And so here's our list. Again, you're taking a test, and we're accumulating things. If you score high on openness, you're going to be very, very creative and non-conforming. Okay, so you're imaginative. If you score low on openness, you tend to be very, very conforming. You do things the way you're supposed to, the way that you're told to, and there's nothing wrong with that. You tend to be very practical. The high openness tend not to be quite so practical. Then we look at conscientiousness. If you are low on conscientiousness, you tend to be, you don't do a lot of thought into your behavior. You're quite often you say yes to something and then you turn around and say, yeah, no, don't feel like it. Okay. You tend to be a little bit more lazy. And that what you want to do is what you want to do at the moment. So you tend to be very spontaneous. So again, scoring low. If you score very high on conscientiousness, if you say you're going to be there, boom, you are there. Even if you got to drag yourself in sick, you tend to be highly ambitious and competitive. You're always on time. Now, again, this is a sliding scale, so you can be a little bit closer to the low score. And that just means that you tend to do this, but you can make yourself do the other. Extroversion, if you score very low, that's going to be my quiet, shy person. They're going to be, they're not going to be found in big groups, at least not voluntarily. If you score high on extroversion, you tend to be very talkative. You got a lot of people around. You tend to be very emotional and, touchy-feely, and you love that social atmosphere. If you score low on that, social things like parties exhaust you. All right, then we're going to score on agreeableness. If you score low on that, you tend to be a little bit on the rude side. You don't love to cooperate all the time, and you tend to see, things in a very critical or negative light. If you score high on agreeableness, you are most of the time good nature. You believe in people. You believe things are going to work out well. You tend to be very helpful and trusting. And then the last thing is neuroticism. You tend to be, if you're very low on neuroticism, you tend to be very even-keeled. You don't go off the deep end. You don't go into extreme highs or extreme lows. You just kind of take things as it comes and you maintain this normalcy. You tend to be rather calm and secure. Now, if you score high on neuroticism, you tend to react emotionally. You're very temperamental. So it's like we don't really know what we're dealing with at any given moment because you can change. And you are the worrier. You're the worrier. So again, we've gone from 200 down to 16 and now down to 5. All right, so that's going to be our testing procedures. Now let's look at something we call projective test. Projective test. So projective test just means that I'm going to give you a stimulus and we're going to talk about what those are. And what your job is as my client is to respond. So I'm going to ask you things like, what do you see? How does this make you feel? What's happening in this picture, etc. And so it's really this open-ended thing. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you several different things and you're going to respond. You're going to respond. Now I have an evaluation sheet that I have to check. So there's actually this criteria that I have to follow that looks over several different things in your responses. All right, so the 2 primary projective tests, and I'm sure you've heard of the inkblot. Excuse me. So the inkblot is one, thematic apperception test or TAT test is the other. Now what we mean by projective personality tests is I'm evaluating your answers. In other words, if you do a true false or here you've got a multiple choice, That's calculated, that's adding. I'm not assuming anything. When you tell me what you see, I have to determine what you mean or add all this together and come up with an idea of what this indicates. All right, so with the Rorschach test, let's look and see what it is. So projective test, I have to interpret it. The therapist or test giver has to interpret it. It's not calculated. Okay, so I'm interpreting. So it's a series of ink blots, and it's going to be 10 cards, the originals were, and half of those cards are going to be simply in black and white, and half are in color. Now, here's the funny part about this. The ink blots are literally ink blots. So what we do is on one half of the paper, we drop some paint, and then we fold the other half over, smush it together. And so what you have when you open it up is two identical sides. Okay, so that's how they form these. And I'll ask you as a therapist, what do you see? What does this look like? And so even though it's just an ink blot, you try in your mind, your creativity, to come up with something that it looks like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down all of your answers, and we're going to determine some different things. So when we're looking at this ink blot at the bottom, you can see they're identical halves. But what is it that you see in this ink blot? All right, so the most common answers are one of these two. It's either two faces pointing out, their heads are, the back of their heads are together, or a butterfly. And so I'm going to show you several pictures, and I'm writing down what it is that you see. And here's a colored one. And so when we're looking at this, what do you see? And you're going to tell me what it is. Now you notice in this color one, that the color may make you determine it to be something different than you would if it was black and white. So this is why we add in the color. So just a brief look at, here are 10 pictures, and you can find these online as well. And so I will go through all of these, and what I'm going to look for is an idea. Do you have a theme that's going on here? So is there a theme? In other words, I tend to have some people that see a lot of mystical things. So there's either aliens or supernatural forces here. And so that would be a theme. Some people see mostly people. Some people see mostly, animals or cartoon animals. And some even see sexual reproductive organs in these. And that's totally normal. That is not abnormal at all. So anyway, this is going to be the ink blot test, Rorschach ink blot test, and I'm looking for a theme that's in it. So for instance, this is one of the things here, and you can look at this and say, and I actually thought that this was originally two people as well, but you get to, choose one of these, but actually in my office you would be responding to this, and then I would write down what it is that you see. And so when you respond to all of these, this is what we're recording: what you see, the location that you're seeing it from. Are you taking the entire ink blot, or are you looking at one detail? So I want to go back real quickly and go to the colored one at the bottom. To me, this was a dog's mouth. His tongue is hanging out there at the bottom. And, I don't even know what the biological term is from the thing that hangs down in the back of your throat. That's what that is. And he's got a pink nose, and he's got brown fur. So I'm taking all of this into consideration. I've had students that only looked at the thing underneath what I call the tongue, that thing that's hanging down there. And they've said that's somebody that's, hanging from something. So they have one arm on one place, one on another. Another person responded, that's a cross that's in the middle of a cavern. And so I'm going to write all of these things down. Are you looking at the whole thing or only parts of it? Did the color influence your decision? You know my answer, it being a dog. Definitely color influenced it because I had a pink tongue and a pink nose. Again, themes. Is there a consistent theme? And then what were your thought process? What led you to believe this? All right, so again, this is subjective. I have to come up with my own kind, or projective. I have to come up with my own interpretation to answer each one of these questions. I have to analyze each one of these questions according to what you told me. All right, the last projective test is the TAT test, thematic apperception test. And instead of an ink blot, what I'm showing you is a picture. And what I'm asking you to do is to look at this picture and tell me what's going on. So you're creating an entire story here. So you're not only telling me what you see, but you're telling me the story behind this. Okay, here's another one. And this one was always an interesting one. I wish we were in class so we could see this. So this was an interesting one. I've had many people say, well, this is the night that you got drunk and you wake up to that in the morning and think, what was I thinking? Someone else says, you know, a husband has just lost his wife. Another one, you know, some other people say a murder just took place and now he's remorseful that that happened. All right, and then this picture. So again, what's happening? So instead of just identifying a thing, you're looking at the story component. And again, I'm still writing down all of those things. I'm analyzing, is there a theme that is happening here? And then we'll, you know, look at it from the perspective of your life. All right, so when we're looking at social media, there is a psychological component to that. People, if you look at what pictures they post of themselves, you can actually come away with some traits. Now, whether your perception of those traits is correct or not, that's a whole different ballgame. But when they see your picture, everyone makes an assumption about you. So it's kind of natural to investigate that. All right, so we're nearing the end here. And so now we're looking at objective testing. Objective testing. This means that it's going to be computer generated, a systematic, it's a, you know, answers are going to shove you over into this category or that category. In other words, I am not interpreting it. The mechanics are interpreting it. So the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the MMPI, is the most commonly used objective personality test. So there's between 500 and 600 questions, and they're true, false, or I can't say. And so in this MMPI, this is going to identify disorders and abnormal behaviors. Now, there's a test that is very close to this that also has some of these same questions, but it identifies strengths, etc. Now with the MMPI, I did want to back up and say there are certain fields that you have to take this. You don't get a choice. Those in military service, police officers, pilots, airline pilots, doctors, surgeons, they have to take this because this test is going to say what your stability factor is. Now, you might say, couldn't you determine that on less than 600 questions? Well, you definitely could, but the truth is they have all of these questions and they're all worded a little bit different, but they're all asking the same thing. So by the time you get past the first 100, you're being a little bit honest because you're not trying to trick the test. All right, so the Myers-Briggs, this is a very popular test that's been given out, and I really like this. Now, there's a lot of naysayers and people out there saying it's a bunch of bull, but when I have my students take this test voluntarily, of course, it really does come out. I have them write a short paper on it, and it really seems to bear witness that, yes, this absolutely does talk to me about my personality. And so I'm looking at either extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuiting, thinking versus feeling, and judgment versus perception. There should actually be 4 items there. I have 2 of them joined together. All right, so looking at behavioral genetics, and we're almost done, I want us to understand there is a biological basis to our personality. If you look at this, you'll see the blue lines on this graph represent identical twins. The gray shorter lines on that graph identify fraternal twins. So what we're talking about is how alike are they in their behavior. And what we found is when identical twins tested, you can see those blue lines are far higher than the gray lines. identical twins end up sharing a lot of the behavior. Now, it's not just genetic, because you see that's only like 52% for extroversion. If one is an extroversion, the other one is as well. But still, that's huge when we compare the blue to the gray. So biology does have a lot to do with it. All right, so the monozygotic versus dizygotic, even in our behaviors, our personalities, we're going to be much more alike than we are as identical twins than we are fraternal. Now, when we're looking at schizophrenia, this is really interesting. Just looking at it as disease. So we talked about that being a genetic basis. So with twins, it's only half of the time do both of them have schizophrenia if they're identical twins. So the same with our personality. So when we're looking at our personality, identical twins share about 50% of the same traits. Dizygotic twins only between 15 and 20%. All right, that is it for our chapter. All right, hopefully that last one was super interesting to you and you will do well on this unit exam.